everybody. Welcome to Summer Game Fest.
Who gives a
Lies of P dropped a demo during Summer Games Fest, and I have some thoughts. Now, it was a game I was aware of going into it, and I was quietly confident that it would get a good showing here. Getting a hands-on preview is definitely pretty cool. Now, before I jump into my thoughts on the demo, a little bit of a background information about Lies of P. First of all, hi, how you doing?
Hello there.
Second of all, it's an action role-playing game developed by Round 8 Studio, who seemingly have never developed a game before and don't have a Wikipedia page, so that's a good start. It was revealed in 2021, but actually got on people's radars at 2022's Gamescom, where gameplay was revealed, as well as a day one launch for Xbox Game Pass. As a PlayStation user, I don't care. It went dark for a bit before resurfacing last night. I've now beaten the first major boss, and though there's a little more to come from the demo, I want to share my thoughts on what I've experienced so far. I do want to point out that this is of course the demo and probably won't be indicative of the final product, but with that said, Lies of P is inspired by Bloodborne in the same way that I am inspired by my twin brother. There's a huge amount of shared genetic code in there. The Soulsborne formula is baked into Lies of P at its core, but if you're going to steal from something, then steal from the best, I guess. Immortals Phoenix Rising was fundamentally sound, not because it was super original, but because it copied Breath of the Wild, one of the greatest games of all time. Lies of P inherits what Bloodborne pioneered, namely the more risk-based Souls combat. It took me a while to shake the Elden Ring player in me, as in Lies of P, patience will usually be rewarded with a swift kick up the bum rather than the enemy presenting you theirs for a few free hits. I honestly like this form of combat as it makes the whole thing feel much faster and more responsive. I particularly love the ability to regain your limited healing because yes, the Estus Flask will return in Lies of P by dealing a certain amount of damage. I'm a big fan of free refills, and Lies of P indulged that more than goddamn Burger King. It's time to be honest with you. Despite having just ranted and raved about Lies of P's risk and reward combat, which therefore means that I've just praised Bloodborne's combat, I've never actually played it. I've never actually played it due to the presence of a certain 8-legged creature. Maybe I should stop comparing the two of them, examine Lies of P on its own merits, and stop comparing it to a game I haven't played. Nah, besides, someone's gotta remember Bloodborne.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the
Bloodborne.
You have a light and heavy attack map to R1 and R2 respectively, with each of these changing between what weapon is equipped. You can block with L1, but you can count the amount of times I used it on one hand. It's mainly used to parry, as if you do it just as you're about to be hit, you can stagger an enemy, and I'll be surprised if I have the footage from that, as like I said, I never used it. I much prefer to lunge into attacks rather than trying to parry. If you attack an enemy, they'll stagger out of their animation most of the time, so waiting for a chance to parry never felt like the risk was worth the reward. I'm also incredibly impatient. At the beginning of the demo, you can choose between one of 3 fighting styles that vary which weapon you begin with. Though I chose the balanced one, I thought it would be the so-called basic one to test out the game's combat with, I was delighted to find out that you can very easily purchase the other weapons before the first boss fight, where I switched to the rapier. I usually like my weapons fine, that is to say I like a greatsword, but I found the rapier to be a much more dynamic sense of play. It remedied one of my biggest problems, namely the dodging. There's apparently some form of weapon crafting system that allows you to change the scaling on certain weapons based on what blade and handle you equip, which seems to be a decent way of customizing and providing a little bit of variety to the game and allowing you to truly create a lot of different builds. That's one of the things I'm very excited at looking forward to in the full game. Souls games typically give you a lot of tools in order to beat a particular boss. Bosses are varied in the way they fight you, some of them are agile, some of them are more tanky, but overall it's up to you about how you want to take it down. That's why challenge runs of Souls games work so well, because everything is applicable. Sure, you can do a weathered straight-sword run in Elden Ring, it's not advised, but you could do it. Back to the dodging thing though. When you're locked onto an enemy, you strafe to the side rather than do a full dodge roll, and it never really felt that intuitive. Enemies' attacks would glide over my head only to smash into my cranium at the same frequency. It's especially something I noticed during the first major boss battle, where I kept being caught by attacks that would often miss on other attempts. The heavy attack for the rapier includes a helpful little dodge backwards, which when chained with a roll, allowed me outside most enemies' attack radiuses. I could then rush in and go again. It wasn't a perfect system, I kept running out of stamina, but it at least worked and felt fun to do. There's 2 complaints I have regarding the gameplay, and that comes in the form of the camera and the move queuing. Especially when in an arena, the camera sometimes gets a little lost. God bless the cameraman for shooting inside of my arsehole, but it's extremely difficult to keep track of an enemy when he stays there. Enemies that chase you are particularly bad, as their lock-on whips the camera around and often gets stuck. It leads to a bit of a gank sometimes, and that's exacerbated by the move queuing. The action system is brutal in this game. Lies of P requires full commitment to your attacks. You will be finishing every button press. When the combat is this fast paced, the combat is dead set on completing actions that are no longer applicable. The amount of times I kept being locked into an attack I'd pressed a while ago, only to then be staggered out of the animation, rinse and repeat, was countless. It leads to you getting hit way more often than you should, just because you can't cancel animations. Now, not every game allows you to do so. One of the main things about why bosses like Miscellaneous are so hard is because she can cancel animations and you can't, but still. It got a bit frustrating when I died because of a hit that I only took because the game was completing an action I hit a few seconds ago that's no longer helpful. The enemies moved by now and I'm up shit's creek without a paddle. I understand that some people might like the strategy of when to attack, but I don't think it synergizes well with the general combat. If everything's trying to get you to risk it, you're likely going to make the danger either too great or too little, making you much less likely to take that risk in the first place. The dodge is slightly delayed and attacks are queued with no way to clear that, leaving the combat to not really feel as tight as I would want it to. Having to plan slightly ahead with information that I couldn't have at the time was annoying at first, but you get used to it. I'm a veteran of Google Stadia, so I'm used to input lag. It's not a deal breaker, but it took a little bit of time to get used to. It's one of the reasons why I like the rapier, as you can attack twice for every button press. 2 R2s with a greatsword and you might as well just start writing your will. Lies of P runs with the currency as levels system of the Soul series, and honestly I don't have much to say about it. It's here, it works, though I do appreciate it spawning the currency outside the boss arena when I died in there. Leave your stuff at the door and all that. You could do that in Elden Ring, but you had to go into the boss arena, collect your runes, and then quit out. It just felt a bit cumbersome. Lies of P follows Pinocchio as he searches for his creator while also attempting to become a real boy, and can someone please tell me why Pinocchio-themed media has had a resurgence recently? At least they're sticking it to the man. I'm sorry. I must confess to being a little disappointed at the storytelling in the demo, but I'm also willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. Though it's the first 2 chapters of the game, titles in the genre typically take a while to lay down all of their ideas. I mean, Dark Souls literally begins with the player exploring because it's the end of the world and there's literally nothing else to do. And I imagine what story Lies of P has to show is likely to be developed later down the line, and they didn't want to give away all the goods in the demo. Fair enough. To be honest, I don't know what I was expecting from the story. Like, it sets up with an opening cutscene and then jumps straight into gameplay, which I'd much prefer it do. I don't want to sit through a giant cutscene at the very beginning to then be stopped, and then for it to have another cutscene and then to have gameplay. I'd much prefer it just jump into it like Lies of P does. I think my main complaint is just with how obtuse it can be. It introduces a lot of concepts and doesn't really explain them very well, I don't think. I get that that could be explained as just part of the lore and part of how they're delivering stuff, you know, within loading screens and papers you can find around the environment, but when they introduced the concept, it kind of felt like they just introduced it and then moved on. This is just something that I'm recording like after the fact because it's something that I've been thinking about while editing this, so take my criticism with a grain of salt, I guess. I mean, there is the truth or lie system, but honestly I don't really think it does anything with it. There was a pop-up when I chose to do the lie, but that didn't really have any major effects. I didn't notice anything, and honestly I don't really know where they're going with this system. Part of me does worry that it's just going to be a system that's here because they wanted to play on the whole Pinocchio thing, rather than actually being a gameplay thing, but also I think there's only one use of it in the demo anyway, so I'm not going to be able to gain that much from that. It's just something that I'm a little bit cautious over, but not something that tanked my enjoyment of it by any stretch of the imagination. The setting at least looks pretty nice, the environmental design is top notch, there's a creepy, unsettling atmosphere to it, and the designs of the enemies really work off of that. Puppets are a really strange thing if you think about it, and I think the game works with that quite well. But I do think there's a little bit of a lack of enemy variety. It's pretty much possessed puppets and dogs as well as some minor variations on those two things, but I do think that's a bit of a nitpick. The enemies have varied enough movesets that I think it gets a pass. They are still fun to fight after a while. The game is a lot more forthcoming with its shortcuts. There's pretty much one before every mini-boss and major fight that shortens the run back, and for the love of God, thank you for that. You have to take the long route the first time, obviously, but unlocking it means that the subsequent attempts are much easier and the loading times were good enough that I had time to regroup and go again within about 20 seconds. I love Elden Ring, but the load times are a bit much on PS4. P seems to be optimized pretty well, though the demo file was 20 gigabytes, so I'll hold off for the full release, I guess. The varied blood effects are neat, but Pinocchio's ability to miraculously dry his white shirt of blood is a little bit cheating. I know you've made him look like Timothée Chalamet, but still a little bit unrealistic. After spending roughly 2 hours with Lies of P, I have to say, whilst I think it is a little bit janky, it's got that fighting feeling. Rough around the edges, but I imagine a wooden doll is too. That sounded way more sexual than that. It may not be the most original thing out there, Bloodborne comes to mind, and I keep getting it confused in my head with Steel Rising, another Souls-like where you fight constructs in a darker setting, but considering it was apparently just okay and Bloodborne is... There's hope on the horizon. Maybe it'll turn out good, or maybe it'll pull out cosmic horror midway through. But that's just a theory. A game theory. Anyway, I'll be keeping an eye on it and maybe even picking it up when it comes out. The demo's free on current and last gen systems, so if it seems like the kind of thing you'd like, then check it out. With that said, I hope you have a good day, and if you excuse me, I'm going to go play the rest of the demo. Peace out.